I knew the second he swaggered into the glass-walled conference room that the day was about to turn into a slow-motion train wreck. Ethan Crow, freshly appointed CTO of Helix Dynamics, had that Silicon Valley peacock energy. All grin, no gravitas. He'd come from a startup that crashed spectacularly after 2 years, but apparently disruption looks good on a resume if you say it loudly enough. He dropped his laptop on the table like a magician revealing his deck of tricks and started clicking through a deck full of buzzwords: innovation ecosystems, synergy alignment, AI-driven optimization. The usual corporate word soup served lukewarm. Half the room tuned out. The rest pretended not to. I sat near the end of the table, silent, watching him like I might watch a YouTube ad I couldn't skip. Then he paused mid-slide, scanning the room as though he was about to pull a rabbit out of his arrogance. "Effective immediately," he said, puffing up like a self-certified alpha. "Any personal project that's ever touched company hardware, laptops, servers, VPNs, whatever, must be deleted. Today. No exceptions." He let the sentence hang, then pointed right at me. "That includes yours, Morgan." The air thickened. A few co-workers shot me sideways glances, sympathy mixed with curiosity. It wasn't fear that twisted my gut. It was disbelief. He had no idea what he'd just stepped in. My project wasn't some cute hobby. It was the core of the company's flagship analytics engine, the same system investors bragged about in earnings calls. Built years before Helix even existed, licensed, not owned. They paid me a quarterly fee for its use, because legally, it was mine. But Ethan, in his crusade to reassert IP control, had just declared war without reading the battlefield map. I kept my expression neutral, leaned back in my chair, and said nothing. "Good," he smirked, mistaking silence for surrender. "Legal's running log audits by Friday." His laptop clicked shut. Meeting adjourned. He strutted out like he'd just secured corporate immortality. Around the table, I caught a few quiet exhales. People wanted to say something but didn't. You don't challenge new executives on day 3, not if you like your paycheck. I gathered my notebook, kept my face unreadable, and walked back to my desk. Helix's open floor plan was a sea of beige cubicles and passive-aggressive motivational posters. My monitor's reflection stared back at me, calm, unshaken. No one watching would guess that by this time tomorrow, the company's crown jewel and Ethan's career would both be free-falling. I opened my private directory. 12 years of evolution sat there. Versions, modules, improvements. Every line of code a fingerprint of my history. My algorithm, CentraCore, was the engine under everything Helix sold. The licensing agreement spelled it out in language that made lawyers weep with joy. Independent IP developed prior to employment, used under renewable license. And buried deep inside was one razor-edged clause. If the company deleted or terminated their local copy without renewing, the rights reverted automatically to a GNU public license, free to the world, irreversible. That clause was my insurance policy, my dead man switch. I leaned back, remembering the day my attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Naomi, had insisted I include it. "Someday," she'd said, "someone with more ego than sense will try to take what's yours. Let them." Ethan was that someone, and the idea of watching him walk into his own trap had a certain mathematical beauty. I could fight him, march into his office with the contract, shove it under his nose, and watch him squirm. But that would be loud, messy, reversible. Or I could do exactly what he told me. Delete the files, calmly, quietly, legally, and let the system do what it was built to do. The cursor blinked on my screen like it was asking permission. A single keystroke, and the world would inherit Helix's most valuable codebase. My lips curved just slightly. Ethan thought he'd issued a command. In reality, He'd just authorized the most elegant self-inflicted wound of his career. I didn't rush. Revenge that works is never fast. It's surgical. Back at my desk, the low hum of keyboards and HVAC filled the air. That soft, mindless rhythm of office life. Slack pings, mouse clicks, shallow laughs from people pretending they weren't terrified of layoffs. Everyone acted busy. Only I knew there was a time bomb humming quietly on my screen. First step, secure my copy. I opened the encrypted tunnel to my home server, a black box sitting in a locked cabinet inside my Denver apartment. Redundant drives, off-grid backups, encrypted so deeply that even I sometimes forgot the passphrase. The data began to stream out. Terabytes of code, algorithms, models, logs. Everything that built Helix's heartbeat. Bit by bit, it slid away from their control. Watching the progress bar move felt like watching a lifeboat drift out of a sinking ship. Across the aisle, an intern muttered something about a build not compiling. Someone in project management sighed into a phone call. Mundane chaos everywhere. The perfect camouflage. No one suspected that their company's flagship product was quietly leaving the building. I sipped the lukewarm coffee I'd been nursing since morning. My reflection in the monitor looked calm, almost bored. But under that stillness was the same feeling I used to get before a product launch. Focused, electric, inevitable. While the files transferred, I reviewed the clause again in the archived contract folder, the one nobody ever read. Naomi's signature gleamed beside mine. If the licensee deletes, removes, or fails to renew the proprietary code, all usage rights revert to the public license under GNU v3. The transfer is automatic and irreversible. Automatic, irreversible. That line had always made me smile. Lawyers called it poetic justice in legalese. Once the last byte was safe off-site, I cleaned house. Every temp folder, cache, and duplicate file wiped clean. If anyone combed through my machine later, they'd find exactly what the CTO ordered. Deletion logs, empty directories, compliance perfection. Nothing to question. I opened a new terminal window. The cursor blinked in an empty shell like a heartbeat. Two paths again. Confront him or comply. Confronting him would mean surviving his smirk, his condescension, his faux tech jargon. He'd spin it into a communication breakdown and come out smelling like cologne and plausible deniability. But compliance? Compliance would mean precision. He'd get his little audit trail proving that Morgan Hart, senior engineer, followed policy to the letter. And that same audit trail would trigger the license reversion. Poetic didn't even begin to cover it. I took a deep breath and thought about how this all started. Years ago, in a cramped San Francisco apartment, broke but obsessed, I built the first version of the algorithm that would become CentraCore. I was living off gas station coffee and contract gigs, teaching myself to code patterns into adaptive logic. It wasn't glamorous. It was survival. But that code grew teeth. Real ones. Companies wanted it. Investors circled. Eventually, Helix Dynamics offered me a deal I couldn't refuse. Join them, lead development, and license my engine to the company. They got speed and prestige. I got autonomy, until Ethan arrived. I could still hear his smug voice from the meeting, his lazy confidence, his belief that authority equals intelligence. He thought deleting my project would show dominance, like he was marking territory. What it would actually do was pull the foundation out from under him, quietly and cleanly. I typed a few test commands just to feel the rhythm, then paused. This wasn't about rage. Rage clouds judgment. This was math, cause and effect. By the time the office lights dimmed for evening mode, my plan was complete. My code was safe. Their copy was ready to vanish. I leaned back, listening to the quiet hum of servers down the hall. No alarms, no tension. just that slow, inevitable momentum toward justice. When I finally shut down my workstation, I drafted a short message to myself in my encrypted notes app. Tomorrow, Compliance Day. Then I packed my bag, nodded to the security guard on my way out, and stepped into the cold Bay Area air. The city lights flickered across the glass towers like distant embers. Somewhere in one of those offices, Ethan was probably rehearsing his next leadership update. He didn't know it yet, but his next big headline was already written, and I was the author. The next morning, the office was unusually quiet. That heavy midweek stillness when even the espresso machine sounded tired. I arrived early, partly out of habit, partly because I wanted to be the one setting the tempo today. Ethan's voice echoed faintly from the far end of the hallway. Loud, animated, like a man performing for an audience that wasn't laughing. I ignored it, let him play captain while the ship still floated. I set my coffee down, powered up my workstation, and logged in. The familiar blue glow washed over my face. The screen blinked to life with the corporate login screen and the Helix Dynamics logo, the one built on my code. The moment felt ceremonial, like a countdown. Slack lit up with the usual clutter: team check-ins, sprint updates, someone complaining about the cafeteria bagels. No one knew today would mark the beginning of the company's unraveling. I ran a quick diagnostic just to make sure all the backups had synced overnight. Perfect. My external nodes pinged back in sequence, each confirming integrity. Copies safe, encrypted, untouchable. Now there was nothing left to do but follow orders. I opened the internal repository. Line after line of file names scrolled by. Neat, structured, elegant. CentraCore v12.3, the latest iteration, sat quietly inside the main directory. It had outlived 4 CEOs, 2 rebrands, and 1 acquisition. 12 years of work reduced to a single folder. The cursor hovered, waiting. I took a deep breath, then typed the command slowly, deliberately. The system hesitated for half a second, like it couldn't believe what I was asking. Then it flashed a confirmation prompt. Are you sure you want to delete these files? Y/N. I tapped Y. The lines began to scroll, hundreds of files blinking out of existence in cascading order. Deleted, deleted, deleted. It was anticlimactic. No sparks, no alarms, just the quiet efficiency of a system doing exactly what it was told. At that exact moment, a separate server, one buried in a basement data center in Oregon, detected the deletion. The licensing demon I'd built years ago came to life. A series of automated tasks executed in sequence. 30 seconds later, an email pinged my inbox. Subject: License Status Update. Body: GNU, Public License Applied. Irreversible. That was it. A single sterile sentence. No fanfare, no confirmation sound. Just a digital key turning in a lock. Helix's crown jewel was now open to the world. Forever. I stared at the message for a long moment. The gravity of it washed over me, not as guilt, but as calm. Justice rarely announces itself. Sometimes it just slides quietly into your inbox with perfect syntax. Across the office, I heard laughter. Ethan again, probably telling someone about tightening compliance or rooting out legacy risks. His voice carried that smug warmth of a man who thought he'd already won. Let him enjoy it. The beauty of poetic consequences is that they take their time. I closed the email and began the cleanup. Every temp file, every cache, every shadow copy. Within minutes, my local drive looked like a fresh install. If IT audited my workstation later, they'd find a perfect trail of obedience. Employee followed CTO directive. I even left a few old cat photos in my pictures folder, just for human touch. Compliance with personality. Before logging off, I drafted one short email to Ethan. Subject: Project deletion. Body, done. No signature, no punctuation. Just one word. I hit send. Somewhere down the hall, I heard his laugh again. Short, triumphant, like he'd just checked off a major task. He had no idea that laugh was the last sound of his career's stability. I leaned back in my chair, watching sunlight creep across the carpet, cutting pale lines between cubicles. Everything looked normal. Phones rang, keyboards clattered. Nothing burned. Not yet. But somewhere deep in the internet's arteries, the code that had made Helix millions was already forking, cloning, spreading. Developers across the world would be pulling it down by nightfall. Competitors would be dissecting it by tomorrow. I logged out, closed my laptop, and let out a slow breath. The trigger had been pulled. The bullet was in the air. All that was left now was gravity. By the time the sun reached the far windows, the first ripples had begun to spread. At 9:43 a.m., a message popped up in one of the engineering Slack channels. Hey, is anyone else seeing the repo go read-only? Permissions look weird. A few shrug emojis, some guesses about maintenance. Then another message. Wait, why are there public mirrors showing up with parts of our source code? That one lingered longer. Silence followed. Then someone replied, probably a sync error. I took a sip of my coffee and watched from a distance. No one pinged me directly. No one thought to. Officially, I'd done exactly what was required. Deleted the files, followed protocol, checked the box. Across the aisle, a mid-level developer frowned at her monitor. That's odd, she muttered, refreshing the repo again and again. She wouldn't find what she was looking for. It was gone. Or rather, everywhere. At 10:10, my phone buzzed. A friend in finance. You seeing this? Clients are asking why their proprietary analytics engine is showing up on open source forums. I almost laughed. The phrasing alone, their proprietary engine, would have made Naomi, my lawyer, smirk. 10 minutes later, a support ticket popped up in the general feed. Subject, urgent. Client concerned about source code visibility. Details. Exclusive DAR framework appears accessible on public repository, requesting confirmation. The early signs of panic always looked the same. Polite, tentative, professional. That wouldn't last. I kept my demeanor flat, calm, methodical. I responded to small tickets, approved a build request, joined a stand-up meeting, and nodded through updates like any other day. Inside, though, I could feel the hum building. That electric sense when the consequences finally start to crawl out of hiding. By 11 humquack, whispers turned into low rumbling. A senior engineer posted a screenshot of a public repo link. Does anyone know how our code is sitting under a GNU license header? I saw it. Line for line, my algorithm, perfectly preserved. License header intact. Time-stamped. The mirror already had hundreds of forks. Someone tried to dismiss it. Probably fake. Someone cloned a test branch. Then legal joined the private channels. Requests for ownership verification. Repository audits. IP chain validation. A quiet question that told me they were starting to panic. Are there any existing license agreements that could trigger open source reversion? That one made me set my mug down and smile. Across the floor, Ethan's voice was louder than usual. He was rallying a small group of developers near the conference area, waving his hands, pacing. We'll get this under control, he said. It's probably just a permissions bug. I want full lockdown on every repository by end of day. He was a man whistling past the graveyard. I turned back to my screen. Notifications were piling up faster now. Engineers messaging each other in half panic. Screenshots. Confusion. A few whispered suspicions. Someone joked, "Are we open sourcing now?" Guess we're really innovating. No one laughed. The senior dev replied dryly, "No, We're bleeding. By noon, the private Slack channels were chaos. Legal was pinging it. It was pinging DevOps. DevOps was pinging everyone. The term licensing anomaly started appearing in message headers. You could almost taste the fear behind the jargon. Meanwhile, Ethan strutted through it all like the emperor of a burning kingdom. He didn't notice how quiet people became when he walked by. He didn't see the side glances, the tension. He was too busy projecting control to realize it was gone. I spent the lunch hour finishing my open tickets. I didn't rush. Every keystroke felt deliberate, final. I wanted my digital footprint clean. A perfect record of professionalism. When this blew up, and it would, I'd already be out the door with nothing left to trace. By 1:15, another message came through. This one from an old colleague in data ops. Just a heads up, there's chatter from legal upstairs. Something about a license trigger. Whatever's happening, it's bad. I minimized the window, closed my laptop halfway, and leaned back. Outside, the winter light bounced off the mirrored towers across the street. Inside, Helix was beginning to crack from the inside out. They didn't know it yet, but the countdown had started the moment I hit delete. And the next explosion? It would come in the boardroom. By early afternoon, Helix Dynamics was a powder keg of unread emails and muted panic. I'd wrapped my last ticket, closed every tab, and backed up nothing but plausible deniability. My part was done. The rest would play out on its own. Loud, chaotic, irreversible. At 1:58 p.m., I pushed back my chair, grabbed my coat, and said to no one in particular, taking the rest of the day. A few heads lifted, distracted. No one asked why. No one ever does in corporate offices. Curiosity is a liability. I dropped my badge at reception on the way out. "Won't be needing this," I told the front desk associate. She smiled politely and slid it into a drawer, no questions asked. Outside, the air had that crisp, thin bite of a California winter. The world beyond Helix's glass walls felt mercifully sane. I walked 3 blocks to a corner cafe, ordered a black coffee and a turkey sandwich, and picked a seat by the window. The plan had always been simple. Execute, withdraw, observe. At 2:04, my phone buzzed. A message from a friend in finance. Board meeting's a mess. Legal just barged in. Something about an automated license alert. Big trouble. No punctuation, no emoji, just raw urgency. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I could picture the scene unfolding across town. A glossy conference room full of polished veneers cracking under fluorescent light. Helix's quarterly projections meeting always started the same. Investor reps in tailored suits, analysts pretending not to yawn, Ethan at the far end of the table ready to perform confidence. The projector would be showing a gradient slide about sustained Q4 growth. Then the door would open. "Apologies for the interruption," the company's lead counsel would say, though his tone wouldn't carry an ounce of apology. He'd be clutching a printed log in one hand, his tie skewed, his face pale. The boardroom chatter would stutter to a halt. Chairs creak. All eyes shift. "An automated alert just came in from the licensing server," counsel would say. "It appears our flagship algorithm, the Centracore engine, has been released under a GNU public license. Confusion first. The slow blink of people processing words they've heard before, but never in that order. What does that mean exactly?" An older director would ask. The lawyer would place the papers on the table, each page landing with a sharp thud. "It means the code is now open source, free, global, permanent. It cannot be recalled or restricted." The release was automatic, triggered by the deletion of the licensed copy. A few heartbeats of silence. Then someone would lean forward, voice tight. "You're saying the core of our product, the thing that defines Helix, is now public property?" "Yes," the counsel would say evenly. "To everyone. Competitors, universities, independent developers, anyone who wants it. Another voice, sharper now. Who authorized that deletion? The counsel would glance at his printout, finger tracing a line of text. The deletion was executed by user ID ECROE. Time-stamped, logged, confirmed. Every head would swivel toward Ethan. I pictured it perfectly. The color draining from his face, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He'd try to speak. "That's impossible," he'd say. "There must have been a breach." "No breach," counsel would cut in. The trigger condition was built into the licensing terms. You issued the order to delete the files. That action met the clause requirements. The silence that followed would feel heavy enough to break the table. "So you're telling us," an investor would say slowly, "that our CTO has single-handedly given away our competitive edge to the public?" "Yes," counsel would confirm. "Irrevocably." One of the board members, maybe the CFO, would exhale through his nose, eyes cold. Then this meeting just became a termination review. By now, Ethan would be stammering, eyes darting, voice cracking. The power dynamic inverted so fast, it would leave him dizzy. "You don't understand," he'd insist. "It was a compliance issue. I was told." The lead counsel would slide the email across the table. Ethan's own directive printed in black and white. Delete all personal projects immediately. His signature, his timestamp, his undoing. I imagined the room filling with low murmurs, a mixture of disbelief and anger. A director rising abruptly, collecting her folder. Another shaking his head in disgust. And Ethan, sitting there in the middle of it, realizing he'd pulled the trigger on his own career while thinking he'd just proven control. I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl fade into black. Outside the window, traffic rolled on, indifferent. The boardroom was burning, and I didn't need to be anywhere near the smoke. By 3:00 p.m., the shockwaves had escaped the building. The glass walls of Helix couldn't contain what was coming. I sat in the cafe, the late sunlight slanting across my table, watching a city that didn't know a Fortune 500 darling was bleeding out a few blocks away. My laptop screen glowed softly. Tabs opened to tech news feeds, investor boards, and developer forums. And then, like a tide breaking, the headline appeared. Proprietary algorithm from Helix Dynamics released under GNU license. Competitors already forking code. The article was brief, almost giddy. A few analysts, quoted anonymously, called it a seismic shift in the data analytics market. Rival firms were already cloning the repository, pushing test branches, celebrating the sudden windfall of free production-ready code. Helix's stock ticker began to slide, a slow, beautiful descent in real time. I took another sip of my coffee, letting the warmth roll across my tongue. Every piece was falling exactly where it was meant to. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my friend in finance. "Board meeting imploded. Ethan's out. Legal calling emergency session. Investor reps are furious." I could almost hear the raised voices through the text. Inside Helix's conference room, I pictured the chaos. Papers strewn across the polished table, executives whispering damage control into phones, legal scrambling to explain that nothing could be undone. The GNU license was permanent, immutable, digital law written in stone. One director would be muttering, "We need to contact the repositories, have them take it down." And the counsel would answer, flatly, "They won't. They can't. It's public property now." Someone else would demand, "So, who do we sue?" "Technically no one," the lawyer would say. The deletion was authorized internally. That silence, that dawning realization, that's what I wanted. Not shouting, not revenge porn for executives, just that quiet, cold moment when power realizes it's hollow. Back in the cafe, a new email pinged. Subject, Employment Confirmation Inquiry. From a hiring director at a competing firm in Austin. They'd seen the news. They connected the dots. A few more messages followed. Venture firms, startups, even one from a university research lab. We'd love to discuss opportunities. Your profile speaks for itself. I didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. Timing mattered. Let the dust settle first. Let Helix drown in their own PR storm while the world rewrote the rules with my code. Outside the cafe window, the city's rhythm went on. Delivery bikes weaving through traffic, students laughing, an old man feeding pigeons near the bus stop. Meanwhile, inside those sleek Helix towers, chaos had gone surgical. Developers were running blind diff checks. Legal was scouring archives for non-existent loopholes. PR was drafting statements full of words like security incident and temporary exposure. But the code was gone. Not stolen. Liberated. At 4:12 p.m., a journalist posted on X. Breaking. Helix's flagship engine now open source. Dev community hails move as historic. Was this intentional? The replies were wild. Speculation, memes, applause. Someone even wrote, "Whoever did this deserves a medal. Free the code." I smiled, not because I wanted the credit, anonymity was the point, but because, for the first time, the right people were benefiting. Students, innovators, developers who couldn't afford corporate licenses. Ethan, meanwhile, was probably locked in a private room with HR and legal. They'd ask him the same question again and again. Did you issue the order? And every time, he'd have to say yes. He'd argue ignorance. He'd blame others. But the audit logs were merciless. His user ID, his timestamp, his email, his ego. The system didn't lie. By evening, the story had spread to every major tech outlet. CNN Business ran a headline calling it the Great Algorithm Leak. Twitter's trending list was full of hashtags: OpenCore, Helix collapse, corporate hubris. In an industry obsessed with control, I'd handed it to the world instead. I closed my laptop and leaned back, letting the last of the sunlight fade from the window. The city lights began to bloom, one by one, like code compiling in the dark. For the first time in months, I felt weightless. No anger, no anxiety, just quiet satisfaction. Tomorrow, the news cycle would still be spinning, and recruiters would still be calling. Ethan Crow would still be trying to salvage his reputation. Helix's board would still be counting losses. And I'd be free. By the time dusk settled over the bay, the story had gone global. Tech podcasts were dissecting it. Industry analysts were calling it the biggest IP blunder of the decade. And every forum thread, every news comment, every late-night tweet had the same tone. Disbelief wrapped in awe. Helix Dynamics, the once untouchable darling of predictive analytics, had lost its crown jewel overnight. Their competitors weren't just celebrating. They were already integrating the code into their own frameworks. What had once been Helix's greatest secret was now the backbone of half a dozen new projects across the industry. I sat on my balcony, laptop closed for the first time in years. The skyline shimmered with distant office lights, little boxes still buzzing with panic and denial. I could almost hear the echo of Ethan's voice from that first meeting. Any personal project must be deleted, and I had. Exactly as instructed. There was something poetic about following orders so precisely that they destroyed the person who gave them. Compliance as rebellion, silence as execution. My phone buzzed again. A message from Naomi, my lawyer, the one who had insisted on that buried clause years ago. Saw the news. I assumed this wasn't an accident. Well played. I typed back 2 words. Clause worked. She replied with a single emoji, the chess pawn, then went offline. I smiled. She always understood the game. By now, Helix's HR team had probably scrubbed my name from their systems, My employee profile reduced to a deactivated entry in some database, but they couldn't erase what I'd built. They couldn't claw back what they'd released. The irony was perfect. I'd given the world the very thing they'd tried to hoard. Every developer, every small research lab, every student who'd ever dreamed of access now had it. Legally, freely, permanently. Open source wasn't destruction. It was liberation. Somewhere in a San Jose conference room, Ethan was likely sitting across from the board, face pale, hands trembling, his voice cracking under fluorescent lights. He'd blame miscommunication, incompetence, anyone but himself. But the logs would keep speaking, cold, precise, undeniable. There'd be no scapegoat this time. The server history didn't care about charisma or politics. It only knew truth. My inbox, meanwhile, was a flood of opportunity. Startups, think tanks, investors, everyone wanted to talk. They used words like visionary and integrity and leadership. I knew better. They wanted access to the mind that had just rewritten the industry. Maybe I'd take one of those offers. Maybe I wouldn't. For once, I had the luxury of deciding on my own timeline. The night breeze carried the faint hum of traffic below. The city never stopped moving, but for the first time, I felt completely still. I thought about the version of myself from 12 years ago. Broke, overworked, sitting at a second-hand desk in a studio apartment, teaching a stubborn algorithm to learn faster. That kid had no idea his code would one day shake an empire. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, let the amber light catch in the glass, and whispered the old mantra that had carried me through every crisis. Build clean, play fair, document everything. Ethan had broken all three. That's why he lost. I opened my laptop again, just for a moment, to check one last thing. The repository hosting the code now had over 60,000 forks. Someone had already optimized one of my early modules. Another had translated the documentation into Spanish. A team in Berlin was porting it into a neural mesh framework. It was alive now, bigger than Helix, bigger than me. I leaned back, watching the stars fade against the haze of city light. Somewhere, a siren wailed faintly. Maybe from the direction of Helix's downtown office. Fitting soundtrack. Justice doesn't always come from courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it arrives through clean syntax and a perfectly written clause. I closed the laptop for good, let the city noise fade into the background, and smiled into the dark. They had called it their crown jewel. Now it belonged to everyone.